Welcome to Slight Reliability, learning SRE one day at a time. I'm Stephen Townshend.
Welcome back to Slight Reliability. I'm Bruce Cullen. You may not know me. This is the first time I have been here. So as you can tell, we're going to do things a bit differently this time because this is the 50th episode of Slight Reliability. And so rather than Stephen interviewing a guest, you've got the other way around. So I'm going to be interviewing Stephen. I'm really intrigued to find out more about Stephen, about how he got into the journey that has led him here to doing this podcast and to SRE in general. So I guess I'll welcome my guest, Stephen.
Thanks, Bruce. It's great to be on the show. I'm a long-time listener, first-time speaker. Yeah, it's great.
How does it feel to be interviewed on your own podcast?
It wasn't weird until about 30 seconds ago when we started doing it. Now it's pretty weird now.
It was only a matter of time, let's be honest. Well, I guess let's just jump straight in. I'm really keen to figure out how you started out and what your journey was that led you to this point. So I guess let's start there. Let's start at the beginning. How did you?
The beginning, like studying university kind of beginning? Or,
I think that would make sense. Because it's all the journey at the end of the day. All the experiences we have lead us to kind of where we are. So I think, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So after high school, I always knew that I liked computers. I'd been into them for a long time. I taught myself to program in QBasic when I was 12 or 14 or something like that. And so I went to university and studied computer science. And it was fine. I passed my degree, but I did have this particular moment in my last year of university, being in a lab full of people staring at screens and stressing out and pressing screens and trying to figure out algorithms. And I just thought to myself, I can't do this for the rest of my life. And I'd always done drama and musicals and things in my spare time. I started doing it just to meet girls, but it became a hobby I really enjoyed. And so I auditioned for Toi Whakaari, which is the New Zealand drama school in Wellington, where I studied for 3 years to become a professional actor. It was an incredible experience. And then but when I graduated, I found trying to work as an actor was not as fun as studying it. So I started looking for jobs. I had a computer science degree, but no one would hire me because I'd been gone for 3.5 years, except one crazy Belgian guy named Stan Scapers. He worked for a testing consultancy called Qual IT, and he was trying to hire a junior performance tester. And he was intrigued by this drama school background, and that was the reason I got the interview. I've already told this story so many times, but the interview was me showing up in a room. Stan's there, he's from Belgium, and he's got his entire DVD collection. And he's like, which is your favorite? Which movies do you like? And it was things like romantic comedies and Titanic and stuff. And I was like, because I was a bit sort of, I don't know, I just came out of drama school. That wasn't my kind of thing. But I somehow got the job, and I did consulting. So I was performance tester, doing consulting for 10 years. And then after that 3 years internal before I moved into SRE. But during that time in performance testing, I eventually got quite confident in what I was doing. And I'm not actually sure what it was about. I think what happened is that I worked for a company who had like an internal conference once a year. They brought the whole company together and they asked me to do a project and speak about it. And I did. And I kind of I was like, yeah, I quite like this. This is, acting background, technology background. And so I started speaking at conferences, blogging, and I did that for several years. But it wasn't until I was an internal performance tester working for an enterprise that someone messaged me and said, why don't you have a podcast? And that kind of makes sense, right? And I thought, okay, that's not a bad idea.
It is logical.
Yeah.
It is logical. That's really interesting. There's so much to unpick there. The first part is the sort of drama to testing piece, but actually that is interesting. But I'm interested to talk about testing, partly because of my own experience, but also the jump between testing and SRE. I can see some sort of synergy, logical synergy there, but it is still sort of different. So I'm interested to talk about that.
Being the usual host of the show, I am reasonably keen to hear first, what's your connection to testing?
Sure. Okay, a bit about me. I haven't said anything about me, actually, have I? So I'm director of engineering at Squared Up, and I was a tester. That's how I cut my teeth. I was a functional tester at a large enterprise software company called Citrix. I'm sure some of you would have heard of. I did a degree in ICT, the most woolly named degree sort of ever, and there were bits of that I hated and bits of that I loved. And during that course, there was an internship program. And so I was just sending my CV out to wherever, didn't really think too much about it because I'd already had a year's worth of IT support experience before. And Citrix approached me and said, would you like a summer internship or a year-long one? It's like, great, summer job and experience, tick, tick. So I ended up with the job title of intern software tester, figuring out what that was all about. And as I graduated, that's what I was doing. I was doing 3D graphics testing initially to do with ICA protocol, specifically around 3D graphics, which is a very cool first project to work on in test.
Wow. That's not the usual thing you hear about testers starting their career with. That kind of, it's usually like a banking application or something like that. That's awesome.
It was a really good way to get into testing because it was very technical, and it was a really sort of strong team. So some really great people to sort of cut your teeth with, to really get into what is testing, what makes a good tester, what makes a bad tester. There were elements that sort of covered performance, but primarily it was functional testing. We're going back to sort of like 2008 here, so very little automation as well, very hands-on, very manual testing.
So I guess if I answer the question you asked me, I'm quite keen to know how you went from testing to sort of head of engineering as well. But for me, performance engineering in the wider scope, I think it's a really interesting field of work. It's great. But there was, in certain contexts, in certain places, it's sort of pigeonholed into you are the person who builds and runs load tests. And to me, that is not that interesting. It can be a great load test, and getting great data and finding issues is really exciting, and it feels like a valuable thing to do. But I got to a point where I could see that there were maybe 10, 12, 30 different things I could be doing, which would probably have more impact and value in the organization. But I wasn't really being invited or allowed to do that because of you're a performance tester, you do load testing. I saw SRE as a way to step out of that box into the wider ecosystem of the organization and hopefully have a bigger difference. And for the most part, for the year and a half I was working internally as an SRE, that pretty much happened.
That's interesting. It's funny, yet it seems that testing is a theme throughout your career since as well. I've listened to the podcast for a long old time, and it comes up. I was listening to the episode recently about scatterplots. It's like, yes, this is bringing back memories. This is fantastic. So it's one of those skills that once you've got it, it's in you forever. For me, that looks like two things. So one, I didn't have enough skill in essentially writing code and scripting and automation fundamentally. And I could see that the way that functional testing was going to be a lot more reliant on automation, which makes absolute total sense. I was not going to disagree with that trend, but I was thinking like, where does that leave me? And so my options were kind of, I could go somewhere more like performance testing. And there is an element of scripting and automation, but there's a higher focus on analysis, essentially, which would be interesting. Or I go down the management route. And at this time, I wasn't particularly interested, frankly, in line management because of all the potential baggage that kind of comes with. So I got into project management, and I project managed a team of 50 testers, I think it was originally, and it was waterfall projects back then, like painful 2-3 year long releases that were just difficult to get out of the door. And then from there into sort of release management, which was more bigger picture release. So pulling it all together across all the departments. And I would say from the perspective of testing, that's where I'd come across the sort of non-functional requirements. We used to call them release expectations because they were just things the organization would expect just to work, like magic, like performance and security and scalability and all those other ability terms. From there, I joined Squared Up, which is where I now work, as do you, obviously. I was a program manager, and my career's been weird. I pitched my boss a business, an idea for a company on a plane on the way to a conference. I had it all planned out. I had slide decks. I had profit and loss in there, market analysis for a dashboarding opportunity, and was getting my hopes set on this thing. I'm not really sure what to expect, and I got to know. But what I did get was, because you're clearly the sort of person that's interested in the entrepreneurial side of things, I've got an idea for you, which was this company that we spun out of Squared Up called Cookdown, which was all around connecting our Microsoft monitoring tool. This is how monitoring comes into my journey, with ITSM tools, ServiceNow in particular. And so we did that for 3 years before spinning it back in and before coming back to engineering. And throughout that journey, that 3-year period, testing was a very large part, because at the beginning, when we spun out this company, there were only 2 of us. So there's got to be a tester, someone to test the things that go out the door. And I was the de facto tester. And even now, I have a engineering management and product management hats. And with my product management hat, I'm always the first to get my hands on the new toys and see how they work. So there's always an element of testing there too.
I think it's good to have a sort of growth or open mind about careers. It's easy to have a fixed mindset and say, I started as a tester, therefore I must stay as a tester, and I can branch into these areas or go into management. But just actually following, your own strengths and interests, and you just don't know where you're going to end up. And I think it's pretty exciting.
I agree. For me, it's all about saying yes when an opportunity presents itself, because you never know if you're going to get such an opportunity again. And interestingly, I didn't start in that place. I didn't start thinking, let's just see how it goes. I started being very proud of the fact I was an expert in testing until, I saw the automation iceberg. It's funny how it goes, isn't it?
But that is a very familiar feeling for me. It's going from performance testing, where I felt top of my game. I'm not the most technical, smartest person in the world, but I knew that world, and I knew how to sort of deal with most situations. And I had a podcast called Performance Time, and that podcast was, I can say opinions which are really informed, or I can teach things. That's what that podcast was a bit like, a bit of mental health stuff in there because I'm into that. But then when I switched to SRE, I became a complete beginner again. So how do you talk about things when you don't know anything? And so the only answer I could come up with was to share the learning journey, and maybe other people will be in a similar boat and be able to go, oh yeah, I understand that, I can appreciate that, and come on the journey with me. I guess that's the way I rationalized it in my mind.
That's obviously logical, but also needed, personally speaking, because not everyone is going to have that voice to be able to speak out and say, I don't know how to do this. So, we all learn stuff afresh the first time. And, it's not a fixed journey, and we're not all experts and everything. And it's fine from my perspective to, fess up to what you don't know, and what better way to do it. So I take my hat off to you for doing so. I'm interested to hear, since leaving test, what are the things you miss about it? Are there things that you come back to?
Yeah, well, like I just said, I do miss being very confident and experienced in a particular specialist area. That felt good, but at the same time, there was a bigger calling. I can have a bigger difference, so I don't regret that change at all. I also I went from that SRE for 1.5 years to being now a dev role, developer advocate, which is a whole other thing, and I feel completely on the back foot once again. So that's that part of that story. I also miss the biggest thing I miss about performance engineering is when I would explore large sets of data, obviously in scatter plots, and filter down and drill in and do all this analysis and find really interesting patterns of system behavior. Absolutely love that work, and I miss that. I haven't seen the same level of analysis being done in the SRE or observability space yet. I'm sure that it's out there, but it's not as common. So I'd like to bring that into my work again, maybe.
That makes sense. It seems to me, as someone who isn't an SRE, but having a look into what SRE is and involves through sort of conferences and events and speaking to people, there just aren't enough SREs out there. And so the ones that are out there are just super swamped with lots of different things, So part of it's a time factor. And I think the second part, again, being an outsider, it looks to be a maturity thing as the discipline evolves and becomes more mature. Would you agree?
I think also the too SRE obviously means different things to different people, different organizations, but wherever you go, it tends to be a very broad thing. So you're responsible for so many things, you probably can't be a deep expert in many things. And so data analysis might be, third or fourth or fifth, depending on, I don't know, on your priorities based on your context. What about you? What do you miss about testing?
Some of what I miss about actual testing I have in my current role, because I do the product management side of things as well for some of Squared Up, for the plugins and data sources aspects. And the thing I missed was basically getting your head into a new requirement. Every new feature brings with it something new, something interesting, something to learn. And there's a piece of that involves just looking at requirements and speaking to people, understanding what it's supposed to do, and finding those issues, teasing those issues out before any code is written at all. And there's the hands-on technical side of things that I just used to love, basically. Being able to understand exactly how it works and why it works, how it fits within the existing architecture that existed. And clearly there'll be times where it doesn't fit within the existing architecture, where you find like design issues. And the other thing I would say is a good old-fashioned bug bash. Usually the tools of the likes of me in my current role are engineering managers to help reduce bug backlogs, essentially. But they are quite fun because there's a competitive element about them as well. Find as many bugs as you can in a 24-hour window. Go.
I'd never heard of the term bug bash before. So is that what it is? It's like a competition almost to find as many bugs as you can.
Yeah. So essentially everybody, including developers, typically will down tools for a period of time, 24-hour window, 48-hour window. And it's a competition to find as many high-quality bugs as possible. By high quality, I mean well-written. So you can't have one-liners. They're not acceptable because you can't reproduce them. You can't figure out how to debug them and actually fix them, because that's the aim of the game. They are kind of old school, to be honest, in that they lead themselves to the waterfall world, because when you've got a 2-3 year long release and you haven't necessarily started your close down cycle or have a low level of automation, they're a useful tool. But even in the world of CI/CD and serverless, they still have their place, because you can't be testing how everything works with everything all the time unless you have a phenomenal level of automation.
Yeah, but even then, there's a reason exploratory testing still exists and is so valuable. Yeah.
So I've seen products where they've had a really like 90 percentage of automation and very little manual testing, or any testing of any form that involves someone not keeping an eye on the automation. And from a customer's perspective, the quality being really, really low, because of the lack of exploratory testing. I've seen that play out.
I was going to say, you were talking about the missing a little bit of the hands-on. Do you think there's a place for sort of more senior leaders in an organization to stay a little bit hands-on, or is it just not worth it?
I think it's valuable as long as those senior leaders know when to be told they're wrong. Like honestly, that's true of me in my current role. Sometimes you can't be in the details enough to be able to understand everything that's required. So while you might think those people that have just enough information to be dangerous, to know when to be told, no, you are wrong. But the short answer to your question is yes, I think it's valuable for senior technical leaders to still be hands-on in some capacity. I do think that if that isn't the case, then, you get disconnected and you lose touch with what the product does and who it's trying to solve. And ultimately it comes down to the customers, if you lose sight of the fact it's not for you, it's not for furthering your own goals, it's for furthering customers' goals. And there's no better way to do that than to walk a mile in the customer's shoes.
I'm not sure which book it was. I think it might have been Staff Engineer. Talked about the best leaders in an engineering world or technology world come from an engineering background. Maybe they still write a little bit of code. Maybe they don't. That doesn't matter. But having that background, whereas from my experience and working in with large enterprises as well, most of the most senior leaders had no engineering or technology background at all. Maybe had been a project manager, but never actually before that done any of the technical work. And I wonder, is that a good thing? Like, what makes a good technology leader?
That's a really interesting thing. I've got mixed feelings on that. Because on one hand, if you have no understanding of the technical side of things, How are you able to lead that function on one hand? But on the other hand, if you are technical, the tendency is to get caught up in the detail. So if you're not from that background, then it's easier to kind of step back and see the big picture, which is, I'm guessing, why. But I'm sort of interested to know, what sort of backgrounds did these people you're referring to kind of come from? You know, what sort of disciplines were they from?
Yeah, they came from either sort of non-technical consulting backgrounds or like I said, project management, program management, or maybe the last time they actually did technical work was, or any sort of engineering work was, 20 years ago, and hadn't sort of taken the time to read, to listen to conferences and events and find out how things are changing. Maybe it's not so much about having the technical background as it is like the Toyota way talks about, like walking the Gemba. Like actually, I'm a leader and I'm in charge of a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. Being able to go down to the front line and seeing what's actually happening rather than making assumptions. Maybe that's the secret. I
think that's important. I do think a level of technical aptitude, that's probably the right way to phrase it, rather than necessarily background, history, hands-on, is required for that. Because if you have no idea, when someone's talking to you about the architecture of a complicated system and your eyes glaze over, you have nothing, you can't take it in. How are you possibly going to be able to take that in and be able to react based upon what you're being told? So it's aptitude, I would say, is important.
I do take your point, though, that not every, if you're a person who loves writing code and solving technical problems, there's no particular reason why you should become a manager. It's a bad situation that in most organizations, the only way to progress beyond a sort of medium level is to become a manager. And I don't agree with that.
I agree with what you're saying. I remember there being a point where it was sort of like, what do I do? Basically, do I get into project management? Do I become a more specialist tester? And it looked like I was being told, the words I was being told said there is a path for you that is a technical path. But you looked at kind of what that looked like in terms of how that played out in the organization, in terms of people that had gone down that path. And it did make management look like more appealing option, which is a sad thing. I do think that's changing, especially seeing SRE as a discipline. It does seem like there are skills that make up a good SRE that are truly in demand and are valued and are compensated as such. So I do think that's changing. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it is changing. And there is this movement to have staff, whatever you call them, staff engineers, principal engineers, who are individual contributors at a high level, who are working alongside leadership to help the organization move forward and evolve. And yeah, it's a little rarer than it should be, but it's an increasingly common thing.
I do also think there's something about the type of organization as well. I've predominantly worked within software companies where, by the virtue of the fact that the product is software, it's not a tangential thing or something that helps the business deliver its aims and objectives. It's been valued more highly, which has led itself to, having senior technical people within the business that know how to do their thing. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I agree. Having, this is my first product company, but the little that I know, talking to other people from product companies and technology first companies, yeah, I can see that the culture is more, it will allow this to happen more. But if you are maybe coming from a government background or a large enterprise, which is non-technical in nature, yeah, it's less likely to be a thing which is accepted and valued and allowed to happen.
Makes sense. It's sad, but it's true. Means to an end rather than the end product. So moving on a little bit, if that's okay with you, I was going to think about the podcast and podcasting in general. What was it about? Well, blogs first you've mentioned, and then podcasting, that creative part of you that was really, really appealing about blogs and podcasts as an outlet for that creativity.
Yeah. The funny thing is, it kind of started from this project which I was asked to speak about. They asked me to investigate the potential of using social media to help improve personal profiles for individuals in our consulting company and the whole company as well. So that's what I did. And as part of that, I found it quite enjoyable, sort of raising my public profile. And coming from an acting background, I'm not going to lie, I quite like being the center of attention. So that it was something I was sort of drawn to. And the other side of it is being creative, because yes, there's a certain creativity in solving technical problems, but there's another kind of creativity where you express ideas and put things out there and craft things which you think might be entertaining or enjoyable, for people to consume. So that was part of it.
That really resonates. I am 100% not creative in a sort of conventional sense, but I am somewhat extroverted, and I have enjoyed things like webinars I've typically done. There's an outlet for that outward persona. I was going to ask you, so you mentioned social media and creativity and a way of expressing your extroverted traits. What are your views on social media in the context of creativity?
Oh, that's interesting. In my personal life, I basically don't use it because I just find I turn into this ragey person who just can't stand different opinions that come out. So I just disconnect from that. I don't do it. I only do it for work, and I primarily use LinkedIn. I was using Twitter, but it's sort of kind of dying a bit at the moment, and now I use Mastodon as well. I think that in itself, they are not very creative places. They are full of self-promotion, product promotion, advertisements. It's toxic positivity. There's this, everything is amazing. We've got this AI thing will solve all your problems, and we just got all these certifications. Wow. And I just find that, yuck. But there's an opportunity there, isn't there? Which is pretty much how I branded my whole thing, which is there's a place where you can go and put some just basic, genuine content, which is just not trying to be flashy, and it stands out because it's not trying to sell you anything and not shouting in your face. So I guess, I don't get as much back from social media as I do get from putting stuff out there, I guess. I have to be very careful about curating what I consume to get the good stuff out of social media.
I would agree. I actually quite like Twitter, but I like it because I can choose who I follow. So it's like a curated RSS feed, essentially, as far as what I get from it. It's one of those, I wish it didn't work, but it does. I don't use it in my personal life either, but I do use it for kind of sort of personal work-based promotion. So, talking about the interesting things we're doing at Squared Up, talking about, some of the events I've been involved in over the past. And it does work. It's brought me opportunities over the past. And I'm sure it will do in the future, but I wish it didn't.
I've completely ruined my Twitter feed because I follow people just to connect with more people. And so I get massive lists of people that I follow, and it's just a complete mess. But
LinkedIn's a bit like that for me. We used it when we were doing the startup kickdown for outbound sales, essentially, at one point. And if you're not connected with somebody, you can't send them a message to go, hey, have a look at our thing over here. So I'm connected with loads of people as a virtue of that from years gone by. I was going to ask you then, so what do you think the future is of podcasting and of this podcast?
I think for the future of Slight Reliability, I want to keep evolving it. I want it to continue to get better. I want to get better at interviewing. I want to get better at the production quality. I have a podcast that I really, really enjoyed that's no longer being produced anymore, but it's called Reply All. And for me, I listen to that and I think, wow, if I could create content that good, I'd be happy. I could die a happy man. So I think that's part of it. And I'm also thinking about some alternative ways to supplement the podcast. So that could be maybe a newsletter, which is curated content from not just what Slight Reliability is putting out, but other content creators as well. Maybe a conference or event around Slight Reliability, sort of themed around sort of back to basics, no fluff. And also considered something different, an SRE book club. So once a month,
interesting.
Get a bunch of people to read a book related to SRE or a tangential topic, and then come together and talk about it.
Very interesting. So the events, well, when you're ready to do events, give me a shout. I love a good event, both organising and participating.
Oh, okay. You like organising events? That's good.
Well, I've done some before for Squared Up. We still do a Scomathon, essentially, which has been a series of webinars. They used to be monthly up until kind of recently, and an annual event, an annual hackathon as well, which was great fun to organise, great fun to run. So very interested in seeing how that kind of pans out. And a newsletter as well makes total sense, because ultimately, as you're saying, with your views on sort of social media, it's not just about sort of self-created content, but content that's out there that others are producing. There's plenty of valuable stuff out there. But it's really, really hard to sift through the noise to find the valuable stuff.
Probably getting even harder with ChatGPT and AI writing, just blasting out just generic stuff which is dubious in accuracy anyway. And oh my goodness, it's going to be harder and harder to find the good stuff.
Yeah, it's so easy to create content with ChatGPT. I've used it for a few basic blogs just to see, I've also used it for emails, actually. It's quite a good sort of performance hack, or my script is broken, please fix it type stuff. It's a useful tool, but it does mean that high quality content will be at an ever-growing premium as we kind of go on.
I haven't used it yet. I'm kind of like that old man going, "Oh, never take off. I will never do this," but I'll give it eventually and give it a go, but not yet.
It's a matter of time. So moving on then, just thinking about kind of careers and, we've talked about both of our pasts. I'm interested to know where's next and what does the next kind of 5 years look like for you? Where would you like to be?
I'm a little bit still figuring that out. I am at the moment exploring this developer advocacy thing and trying to make sense of it. I think given what I've been reading about and what I'm interested in, long term, I kind of see myself potentially testing out engineering management and leadership. I think that is something I thought I would never do. But I have a good chat with a mentor, a sort of former boss that I used to work with. And the way he puts it is that if you're one person, there's only so much you can do. But if you're like leading people, then collectively you can achieve heaps of stuff, a lot of stuff. And I quite like the idea. And I guess I'm not that extroverted, but I do understand people and I do get a kick out of other people succeeding. So I think maybe it could be a good option for me. How about you? Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Well, before I answer that, just to comment on what you said, I completely agree that there is a sort of gearing factor, when you have a team and you can use them to further something specific. And that isn't just about achieving your own goals. That is about training and mentoring as well. Mentoring is a really interesting topic, actually. I've been chewing over recently. Where you're mentoring someone who doesn't report to you is, I would say, from the perspective of mentoring, almost more valuable than mentoring the people who do report to you, because there's an implicit link there already. People will pick up things from you via osmosis and kind of the other way around as well. We all have things we can learn and do. But the idea of a mentor who isn't motivated to get something from you, like you to be better at your job or whatever it may be, is a really valuable thing. I'm mentoring a couple of people who are literally nothing to do with my team or my department. And it's been really interesting and actually really rewarding for me as well. Partly, seeing them grow and develop and become better at their trades. But also it helps you to kind of realize the things you do know. Because over time, we all pick up experiences and they're all unique to us. And they all have some level of intrinsic value to someone else. So mentoring is a really interesting topic that I'm sure we could spend a whole episode on mentoring if we wanted to.
Yeah, I used to do the grad program at IAG, and we had a bunch of grads come through the performance engineering team. And shout out to Gwen Berry, who was one of the performance testers. She came through the grad program, and she went into the SRE team with me. And now she's 2 or 3 years into her career. She is what I think a senior engineer doing incredible work, and it's just so satisfying to see someone succeeding so much.
Really true. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And then to answer your question, the 5 years question, I don't know. It's quite difficult because if you'd have asked Tester Bruce where did he want to go, I would have gave a more senior tester type answer. But Mike, I've been all over the shop basically, and I'm really torn between a more senior version of what I am, which is director of engineering. So that would be like a VP of engineering, C-level thing. But then there's another piece of me that has an entrepreneurial itch. I think there's a business in me that I want to make happen, essentially. And they're quite different from each other. There's some similar skills, and I've got experience in kind of both of them. I do have ideas that I'd like to bring to fruition over time. We will see. There's an element about that involves risk, though. Taking a career risk is kind of one thing because you can always go and find another job at the end of the day. When you're putting your idea and yourself out there and on the line, it's a whole different other thing from the perspective of risk. So yeah, I think possibly something entrepreneurial in my future, or more of the same, essentially more senior version of what I am today. But I don't know. So I've got one other question thinking about testing, leading on first sort of from interviewing testers. Where do you see testing as a career going in the future?
That's a hard one for me to answer. I always felt a little bit disconnected from testing in general because I was this performance specialist and I had this very sort of narrow vision on that area.
That's okay. I've got some views, if it helps. I only through like interviewing testers and thinking about what the shape of my team I want it to kind of look like. So over the last, I would say 10 years, there's been a swing from manual to automation, and that makes total sense, and that makes sense for the now. But we're going to get to a point where the automation skill is the kind of common, predominant, dominant skill. And it's just expected that if you're a tester, you can automate. And so I think over time, there'll be a greater importance placed on manual again in the form of exploratory testing to supplement automation. Because as we said earlier, there is no substitute for human eyes and human hands because customers of the things we're building are human at the end of the day. They're not ChatGPT or robots. And that's kind of where I think things are going. And kind of leading from that question, do you have any advice for anybody starting out in testing as to, where to go, what they might do, areas of focus?
Oh, a couple of things come to mind. One is that I think when you're starting in your career, there's nothing wrong with focusing on the technology. I think it's a bit of a hard ask because I tried in the past to get grads thinking about bigger picture concepts and ideas and understanding architectures and things, but it's not necessary. It's better just to work that muscle, get confident in your ability to do technical stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. And then later, as the years go by, then start to sort of broaden your vision to how the organization is working, what the business value of this thing is, how the architecture fits together as well, and all those different things. So that's one thing. I think also finding a mentor or at least people who are working in the testing field who you think, I like the way that they work. They seem to be doing things in a way which I admire, and sort of using them as a role model is important. Because I don't know what it's like in the wider testing industry, but in performance testing, there are very few really good performance testers and vast numbers of people going through the motions. And so finding just one person who's doing something new or pushing the boundary or doing a really thorough job, it just made all the difference to me. I was very lucky to have great mentors.
I'd agree with that thing you said, just focusing on the mentor's point and sort of the traits of a good tester, as you say, start with a good technical foundation. But I would argue that in addition, you need sort of those soft skills, passion being really high up my list of things that I'm interested in when I'm interviewing, someone that actually cares, that will go the extra mile, will put an initiative without being told to do those things. And that can be done at any level. You don't need any form of pre-qualification. You need to know the job and what you're doing, which comes from the technical foundations and underpinnings. But then, finding mentors that you can align yourself with, that share those values, essentially, I think is really, really valuable for testing and for future testing.
Maybe another way of sort of extending on that is to think about having a growth or like an emergent mindset and being curious about things and constantly wanting to be better. So yeah, I think that's a really powerful thing.
Be curious. That's a good one. A very good one. It's be curious and say yes, picking up on some of our previous conversation from today. All right. Well, thank you very much for being my guest today on your own podcast.
Yeah. Thank you, Bruce, for being the host of this podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
It's been great to be here. I'll happily do it anytime you want. Thank you very much for listening today and for joining us on another episode of Slight Reliability. We will see you all next time, apart from you won't see me, I suspect. And until next time, stay curious in whatever you do.